returning to the legendary Paul Verhoeven.
Those are up, and they did.
More smarts, and my...
He told me enough.
No, I.
Here's Chuck.
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with a brand new movie review, and this movie review is going to be for a 1990 science fiction action movie that stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, and was the second American directional debut of Paul Verhoeven, after the 1987 success of ROBOCOP, and this film is going to be for 1990's Total Recall, which obviously, like I've already mentioned, is directed by Paul Verhoeven, and was released in 1990, the same year as the sequel to RoboCop was released, and many other films. What's the plot of this? Well, Douglas Quaid is haunted by a recurring dream about a journey to Mars. He hopes to find out more about his dream and buys a holiday at Recall Inc., where they sell implanted memories. But something goes wrong with the memory implantation, and he remembers being a secret agent fighting against the evil Mars administrator Verhoeven. Now the story really begins, and it's a roller coaster ride until the massive end of the movie. So how was this made? Well, the development of Total Recall began in 1974, when producer Ronald Schwarzenegger purchased the adaptation rights to his science fiction writer Philip K. Dick's 1966 short story, We Can Remember It For You wholesale for $1,000. The show that read the 23-page story by the then little-known Pulp Fiction writer in an April 1966 edition of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. Dick's story depicts a meek clerk at Earth named Quail, who visits Recall Incorporation to receive a memory implant of being a secret agent on Mars, but then the process uncovers his true identity as a secret agent who previously visited Mars and whose death will bring about an alien invasion. Yeah. It was then eventually renamed to Total Recall, and Shusett worked on Dan O'Bannon to write the script, and O'Bannon exhausted the existing material quickly, and the short story's abrupt ending meant he could only write 30 pages. Effectively, only the first act and an original second and third act were needed. He suggested sending Quaid to Mars. Shusett and O'Bannon disagreed over the third act. The former wanted something more dramatic. O'Bannon's ending revealed the handprint of the alien machine at Quaid's, who was a replica of the original, and placing his hand on it grants him total memory recall. O'Bannon described the film ending as lame, and Dick read the script prior to his death in 1982, and according to O'Bannon, enjoyed it. Although studios deemed Shusett and O'Bannon's script an ambitious and brilliant idea, it was essentially considered unfilmable, in part because of the extensive special effects and high budget that would be required. And the pair went on to collaborating on the script of the science fiction horror film Alien, then, of course, the success of which earned Shusett a development deal at Walt Disney Studios. And he pursued the Total Recall project at the studio, initially budgeted at $20 million, but the idea did not progress because issues with the third act could not be resolved, and the project was sold to Dino De Laurentiis' De Laurentiis Entertainment Group in 1982. And they even had to revise the script to match Schwarzenegger's action hero public image, because Goldman tried to make it less comical than some of the actress's previous films. And the meek clerk Quail was even renamed Quaid, to avoid referencing the vice president Dan Quayle, and became a muscle-bound construction worker, while fight scenes were rewritten to include more feats of strength and less martial arts or running. Even second unit director and stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong and other stunt people had worked with Schwarzenegger on Conan the Barbarian and Red Sonja said that they knew what he could physically do without looking silly, and Schwarzenegger wanted more creative methods to dispatch Quay's foes because he had been criticized for over-reliance on guns to kill people in films like Commando. Eventually then, principal photography for Total Recall began filming between April and May 1989, and filmed almost entirely in sequence, a rare feat. The production took place over 20 weeks. The initial budget was reported as $30 million, but the final budget was reported being between $48 million and $80 million. and Total Recall is filmed almost entirely on sets at Estudios Churrubusco in Mexico City, Mexico, where 43 casts and up to 500 crew members worked across 45 sets on 10 sound stages. The Earth train station was filmed at the Mexico City, and many exterior Mars scenes took place at the Valley of Fire State Park in Overton, Nevada. So, after being shot and marketed, Total Recall would go on to eventually be released at some time around 1990, and during that time, Total Recall is anticipated to be one of the year's most successful films. On its release, the film earned approximately $261.4 million worldwide at the box office, and was the 5th highest-grossing film of the year. Its critical reception at first was mixed, with reviewers praising its themes of identity and questioning reality, but they criticized the content perceived as vulgar and violent, because that's to be expected from Paul Verhoeven. The practical special effects were well received, though, and earned the film an Academy Award, and the score by Jerry Goldsmith was praised as one of his best works. And since its release, Total Recall has been praised for its ambiguous ending, posting whether Quaid's adventures are real or a fantasy, and has been analyzed for themes of authoritism and colonialism. Retrospective reviewers have even called it one of Schwarzenegger's best films, and eventually went on to be placed among the best science fiction films ever made. Alongside comics and video games, Total Recall is adapted to the 1999 television series Total Recall 2070, and even an early attempt at a sequel based on Dick's The Minority Report became the 2002 standalone film Minority Reports. And eventually, sorry guys, it's raining hard. And a 2012 remake, also titled Total Recall, failed to replicate the success of the original. Alright, I'm gonna go. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that guys, I had to close the blinds. Anyway, as for my reaction, this is without a doubt Paul's second film behind ROBOCOP, second best film behind ROBOCOP, and easily one of the greatest sci-fi and Arnie films ever made, especially from the beginning of the 90s. Like, there are a number of fast-paced, original, special effects-laden action extravaganzas which were made in the 90s, like, for example, John Woo made the quirky and highly entertaining Face Off, James Cameron followed up on his 80s classic The Terminator with an exceptional sequel in the Wachowski brothers, as they were known for back then, created the solipsistic The Matrix. And I would even argue, however, that Total Recall is the greatest of these action films for that era because of its indigenous, made-of-fiction construct. You're potentially watching a film within a film, a fantasy within a fantasy, as the main character does all the things an Arnold Schwarzenegger action hero is supposed to do. There isn't the usual detachment from feeling obsession over spectacle. The viewer has a genuine investment of the brain state of the individual within the film who may be imagining these events. The brain-besting twists and turns of the plot mirror a potentially disorganized brain state. Yes, there's the adrenaline, escapistic violence all good action films should provide, but there's a potential cost to this violence, a genuine commentary, a meta-commentary on the dangers of relying in violent fantasy for stimulation and meaning. And while Total Recall certainly has influences, including The Martian Chronicles, Dune, and the first major film based on a Philip K. Dick work, Blade Runner, it's more notable for the films that it has influences of subsequent years, including The Fifth Element, and many of the rubber reality films such as Arbel a la Jos, aka Vanilla Sky, and The 13th Floor. Also yet another film in the very long list that have had various elements adopted into part of the Matrix, most explicitly here the bug that Quaid has to remove from his body with a high-tech machine, and the possibility of waking up from a particular reality by taking the red pill. And although it's easy to interpret Total Recall in a very straightforward manner, so that the bulk of what we're seeing in that particular moment, the bulk of the dialogue or the literal reality, very convincing arguments can be made that the majority of the film is a depiction of Quaid's memory implant while in the patient's chair at Recall, and those certainly aren't the only two interpretations possible. What matters more than thinking one has a right answer, though, is a deeply captivating story that provokes our interpretation of the amount of fun we have getting here. Verhoeven and the scriptwriting team, which included Daniel Brennan and Ronald Shusett, the writing team behind the Alien films, which began with Alien in 1979, never let us go very long without another plot twist, most of which forced a reinterpretation of the material that went before. And the twists occur about once per every 10 minutes, if not more frequently. The film was even notable as well for its special effects by Rob Bottin, which were far ahead of their time, and its fantastic production and art design, which managed to make us feel both that we're experiencing a vicarious trip to a future grunge, Mars, and an almost Doctor Who 1963-ish absurdly artificial reality, complete with supernatural red skies, and Frank R. Paul's illustrated covers for the Amazing Stories fiction magazine. Like, if they have the ability to cram it full of CGI effects, they probably would have, but technology as it was in 1990, that wasn't an option. They instead relied on real-life action makeup and some pretty terrific fight scenes here. Yeah, like, these have some of the best fight scenes, easily, of any action sci-fi film. Like, I'm not saying all sci-fi movies of recent years are bad, far from it, but there's such a reliance on mind-blowing special effects, and sometimes you feel as if something is lost, and something may be a little bit raw, naive to some. What makes this a masterpiece and the remake merely adequate, in fact, especially compared to the PG-13 dumpster fire remake. This has better effects than that remake from 2012. And when it comes to the cast and the writers and director, Schwarzenegger, Sharon Stone, like, originally her first debut to fame at the time, Rachel Ticotin, and the writers and director are world-class talent and artists. They don't get a job, collect a paycheck, and then give lame, half-hearted performances of work efforts. And each one of them digs and allows their natural talents to shine, and the charisma on display both in front of and behind the camera is just palpable. And Ted Coden in particular really steals the show as incredibly sexy brunette, contrasted to Stone's blonde beauty, who displays physical athleticism and physical specimen for her body as she runs, ducks, kicks, dodges, punches, and fires her way through the Mars dystopia. I would have, if I were alive back then, I would have paid top dollar in theater just to see such an patriotic Hollywood employee like her these days. Like, if I were alive around 1990, she was a pure natural talent beauty at the time, with such an array of talents that no actors in Hollywood of any recognition had possessed for decades, around the time this was released. And speaking of which, Sharon Stone is also on another level, but it's not just her younger beauty and sex appeal that would further go on to be shown in Basic Instinct only, which again seems just leveled up by what Hollywood considers attractiveness in 90s just around the 90s decade, but it was the manner in which her vibrance and charisma come off the camera through her dialogue and athleticism. Indeed, any direction by Paul Verhoeven is terrific. With Verhoeven moving the camera and keeping the film followed with energy, outstanding direction, Verhoeven, and easily, the score by Jerry Goldsmith is sensational, epic, and powerful. But Goldsmith's score going with the action perfectly. Very good score, Goldsmith. And very good direction, Verhoeven. The special and practical makeup effects by Rob Bowden are stunningly well done, and this is among his best work. And there's terrific makeup effects by Bowden. And the visual effects are also incredible, and it truly adds to the film. Even this movie has several funny lines in the movie, and it takes the entire episode tongue-in-cheek, never really letting you know whether it's real or an exaggeration. The delightful tone and great pacing and tremendous cast and acting talent is evident and explains why the 2012 remake was an unnecessary dumpster fire and couldn't even come close to the action, tension, comic timing, and talent that this movie had. Even Arnie himself does a great job of acting in this movie, and is completely convincing as Douglas Quaid. In fact, I think this might have to be his second best action performance. No, third best. Behind The Terminator and Dutch from Predator. This would be third place when it comes to his best performances. Easily. And there might be a lot of unnecessary violence, but it's done in a funny and exaggerated way. Like when Arnie says, "Screw you," and kills a guy with a drilling tool. And then again, the unnecessary violence is to easily be expected from a guy named Paul Verhoeven, who is known for such dark, brutal stuff like ROBOCOP, Basic Instinct, Showgirls, Starship Troopers, Hollow Man. Anything with this guy was bound to just be really, really nasty, and it worked here. It wasn't just overly dark and prohibiting. They even had some light moments too, like RoboCop, for example, and Starship Troopers would often have these corny commercials that would play in the middle of the film to prevent the movies from being too grim. Even Basic Instinct had some moments of humor to kind of just prevent the overloads of sex from ruining the movie. This movie even has good comedic timing too, so that this movie won't be too dark, and people won't just view it as just a dark, gory film. Now, when it comes to the acting in a conventional way though, the acting might not be considered good in a conventional way, but it's just an action flick. And I do like the whole energy the actors put into their performances. However, if there are any bad qualities, yeah, I think I can name a few. Here we go. For bad qualities. Although the story intrigues beyond a doubt, this is not the sci-fi thinker that Blade Runner was. Like, why else would there be so many special effects shots of people's faces puffing up in the vacuum of space? And when it comes to the villain Corleone, I feel like the villain Corleone does not really get too much screen time, nor does the love interest Melina. More could have been done with their characters, because we didn't see either of them too much. The 2012 remake did try doing more with them, and it did it horribly. I'm talking about with this movie. More could have been done with them in this version. A little bit more. Like, specifically the villain could have been used a little bit more. Because he kind of just only really appears in full appearance till, like, near the very end. And another bad quality is, I feel like the Mars deaths at the end feel way too over the top with the eyeballs popping out of the victim's sockets. We kind of didn't really need that shot, to be honest. Here. Could have made it a little less over the top. But despite those bad qualities, they do not ruin the movie at all, and it is still a phenomenal masterpiece of a movie. In the end, I highly recommend this to both Paul Verhoeven and Arnold Schwarzenegger fans that have not seen this movie yet, and then they immediately need to go buy this movie afterwards. Anyways, that's it for my review of Total Recall, the 1990 version. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank the 1990 version of Total Recall, here's how I'm going to rank this movie.
So overall, if you love both Arnie and Paul Verhoeven, then I would easily recommend watching this movie for sure, and then quickly buying it and adding it to your collection for sure. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Total Recall, I'm going to give Total Recall a 10 out of 10.
There we go. That wraps up my review for Total Recall, the 1990 version. And yeah, I want to know in the comments below what you guys thought about this movie. I want to know what you guys thought about both this movie, and I want to know what you guys both thought about the remake, even though the remake will get a rant eventually when I do. I need to rewatch the remake. I have not seen it in years, but I can tell it's not held up well. But it is going to get a rant. It will get a rant. Don't worry about that. For those who want to see me destroy the 2012 remake, have some patience. Don't you worry. That rant will come eventually. And until then, guys, that'll be it for this review. Thank y'all for watching. If you like this and want to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.